Stephen Gentile, welcome to Signature Required.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
You are the executive director for the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. I have abbreviated as THEC on here.
And that's how we do it as well, THEC. And what the heck is THEC? It's a common question we have.
You took the joke before I could even get to it. Like 8 seconds in, I need to rerun this.
That
was
classic dad joke.
Yeah.
We have a presentation called "What the Heck is THEC?" So we're used to that too.
If this podcast is full of dad jokes beginning to end, I'm super here for it. So just keep it coming. Yeah.
So feed us the question. Then you took my line of what the heck is THEC, but I will be okay because you're entitled to that as executive director. So for our listeners, what do you do?
Yeah, so I serve as the executive director of the Higher Ed Commission, and the Higher Ed Commission, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, serves as the state's coordinating body for higher education. And when we think coordinating body, we're talking about coordinating on higher ed policy on behalf of the state. So we are a state agency. My commission, my board is made up of appointed members from the administration as well as the General Assembly. And we are there to represent the needs of the state to institutions. The state needs us to weigh in on the valued credentials in this way. Are we producing high demand credentials for the jobs that are out there? And then vice versa, to communicate to the state, the administration, the General Assembly, name the stakeholder. This is what our institutions are in need of right now to make sure they're meeting the needs that you have. This is the budget that we think is most sufficient for them, or the tuition ranges that we think is going to provide both affordability, but also the money for those institutions to run. And we also authorize every single academic program that occurs in the state, be it public, nonprofit, proprietary. We have a system in place to make sure that the programs that are being offered by state authorized institutions, and again, that's just not public institutions, but private and nonprofit, that they're doing so in good faith, and that they're providing good programs for the students that are in them as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Lot to unpack in that.
For sure.
And I have a lot of questions around higher ed in general. It's a remarkable time to be talking about education, higher education. Culturally, there's a lot going on with higher education. But maybe before we capture into any of that, Tennessee has a historical reputation of being a remarkably undereducated state. A lot of the statistics that you look at, Tennessee doesn't rank in the places that most of us would love to see Tennessee rank.
Right.
So could you give us the governor gives a state of the state address once a year and says, all right, here's everything, kind of the State of the Union, except in Tennessee style. Could you give us a little bit of a state of higher education as it relates to Tennessee? And then I'll start to unpack some of the things that you just talked about.
Absolutely. So another arm of what we do at the Higher Ed Commission, and it's a part of the Tennessee Student Assistance Corporation, part of our commission, is to authorize financial aid as well and distribute all financial aid, all lottery scholarships, all need-based aid, the Tennessee Promise, which is the state's tuition-free program for community college students and technical college students, and Tennessee Reconnect. One state of the state is that we lead the nation in providing access to higher education via financial aid. And that's something that came about in the early 2010s after HOPE had been established, the scholarship had been established for some time. We went into other directions with need-based aid. And again, with Tennessee Promise, it was the country's first tuition-free financial aid program for students.
That was here in Tennessee?
That was here in Tennessee.
Wow.
Yeah, and now many other states have followed. But it came from a very fiscally prudent, fiscally conservative background where we had the money to make that happen. We saved on lottery dollars every year, and that built up to become an endowment that we have now to run that program. So it's not operating on new operating dollars coming from taxes. It's from the lottery scholarship fulfilling an endowment. But to strategically deploy that in a way that helps lower the cost burden to our students has been a large driving force in the increase of our attainment here in Tennessee, as more and more students are attaining the credentials, the certificates, the associate degrees, and then transferring on to get their bachelor degrees. It's been phenomenal. A study I was a part of showed how greatly debt was reduced for students going through Tennessee Promise program. The burdens that are placed on them are much lower now. That's been one pillar in that atmosphere. We also, about 2010, the Complete College Tennessee Act greatly transformed higher ed policy in Tennessee and also led the nation therein as well, where we have what's called the outcomes-based funding formula, where we fund institutions. All their operating dollars is solely done through the outcomes-based funding formula. As institutions perform well, produce more graduates, more job placements, more research dollars, as they do well compared to their prior performance, they're likely to get more appropriation. So we've geared institutions into putting the money where the mouth is. They've always been for completion. We have too. Now we're funding that. So long story short, graduation rates have been increasing at our institutions. Completion initiatives have been put into place as well. We've seen some great transformation, but we're not done yet. This past session, I told the House Finance Committee and the Senate Education Committee that for too long we have been talking about 6-year graduation rates. How many students are graduating within 6 years? That is a very common measurement. It's used by all states. The federal government uses it. The federal government defines that. But we need to be talking about on-time completion. How many students are graduating in 4 years? If you started off at a university full-time, you probably expect to graduate on time. We have a long way to go there. Fewer than half of our students are graduating on time within a 4-year environment. That number has been increasing, but we need to focus more on that. And the same is true with our community college sector. Allowing to say to institutions, what do you need from the state to add capacity to help you support students graduate on time? What's getting in your way? What's getting in the way of the students? That's where my mind is right now a lot.
Are you seeing that number be the same? You say for 4-year degrees, they're not graduating on time. Are you seeing that also for certification programs, associate's degrees? You said community colleges, but you're seeing it across the board.
Across the board. And it's not a problem at all unique to Tennessee at all. Like I said, that focus on the 6-year graduation rate, all states will tell you their 6-year graduation rate. But yeah, whether you're starting off at a 2-year college or a 4-year university, if you're starting off, again, that measure that I have is for full-time students. They start off full-time. But then life happens. Maybe they're coming straight out of high school and they don't have a job or they don't need a job and they're taking a full load. But then they drop down to fewer credits to be able to manage a job as well. In higher education, we've been talking about this a lot, but now we need to really investigate it further. If they need to have a job, how can we make higher education even more flexible to their needs? What courses are we offering? When are we offering them? What's getting in their way? But again, yes, at every higher education level, that is a persistent problem.
We have a rule that is no dumb questions. So I just have to ask, I think the biggest brand I see out there for flexible learning, right, you would say is like a University of Phoenix. You see these online, it sounds like I could be a University of Phoenix student here today.
Yeah.
Based on their branding, and it's everywhere and pervasive. Do we have something like that in the state of Tennessee, and what is it?
We have a number of options that get there. The Tennessee Board of Regents, which oversees our community colleges and technical colleges, they have online programs that are meant to be that flexible. Institutions have it as well, but the system of TBR is overarching. UT has been moving that direction in the last couple of years, and perhaps it'd be helpful to have some links to share with you on that about some programs that they are about an opportunity that they are walking into right now that would allow for those more targeted investments in partnership actually with the Arizona State University to be able to provide. Arizona State University does a really good job of providing online programming for students across the nation, and UT is working on providing something similar to students here in Tennessee. So there is an option here. And I'm a believer that a way to lower the cost burden of higher education is find a way to reach more students in a cost-effective way. Online has that capacity. There are a lot of structural costs associated with online that can make it cost prohibitive to enter into that. But ideally, in the long run, you produce programs that will make it cost effective to be able to have these online programs.
Makes sense.
One of the culturally prevailing themes right now is that college is not for everybody.
Yeah.
And if you said that 10 years ago, I think it would have been frowned upon in a lot of ways, that people would have said, well, your life outcome, if you don't go to college, is going to be really poor. And now it's shifting to where people are saying college isn't for everybody. There's a focus on real skills. And like my background in the transportation world, if you have a Class A CDL, you can make on your first day of employment $120,000 day one, and it's up from there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that look at coming out with a degree, whether they have debt or not, and contrast it with being a plumber and saying, AI isn't going to replace this, right?
Right.
Somebody's got to turn this wrench. So for someone in your role, how do you look at that cultural shift that is happening right now?
Yeah, and I'd say this is something that we were also grappling with 10 years ago as well. And we are consistent, and I'd say by we, I mean my colleagues, myself, and our peers at our institutions, and saying the question is college for everybody? People tend to think of the traditional 4-year format and identify, like you said, plumbing, maybe apprenticeship opportunities for them. I'm a big believer that some sort of post-secondary training is necessary. And what does that look like? Does it come from a university for a bachelor's program? For many of the jobs in high demand, it does. Absolutely, but not all. The work that our TCATs, again, the Technical Colleges of Applied Technology and the community colleges, and offering certificates where they're coming on for 6 months or less than a year to put them into programs like plumbing as well. We thoroughly believe that the options that the state has to allow that to be a tuition-free program for our students is an option that most students should be exploring. What I'm concerned about is you do have graduates from high school who maybe they need to tinker and tool up on very targeted skills because they've already been doing a lot in high school with dual enrollment, for instance, which we have substantial amount of programming here in higher ed for, which I could talk about more later. Dual enrollment or other practices they've done in high school where maybe they don't need a full college program afterwards, but they need something. Can we help provide that? What I'm most concerned about, however, is the pervasiveness of that message and students graduating from high school saying, well, I hear I don't need college, but they also don't have any other direction. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to get that one extra skill for the job. Mm-hmm. We have advised TN counselors in high schools specifically to help students figure that out. We believe that our TCATs, community colleges, universities provide great options, but if that's not for you, what are you going to do after you graduate high school to have a successful life? We want to help you make a connection to that.
And I think that's well said in contrast to say it's permissible that a 4-year degree may not be right for you. But what also is exceedingly unlikely to be okay is to come out of high school with no skill and no plan for what you're going to do next. So when people hear higher education, I think by default, people think 4-year degree.
That's right. Yeah.
But your purview is, yes, over the 4-year degree side, but also equally as much over the technical schools and the plumbers and every type of welder that's under your jurisdiction, right?
That's right. Correct.
Got it. Stephen, one thing that we do, it's the most favorite thing that Carly and I do on the program, is a section called No Dumb Questions.
Okay.
So every time we bring on really smart guests that are experts in their space. I mean, clearly you have lived this and climbed to a very high level. So a lot of the questions that we've always wanted to ask somebody in the world of education, particularly, you're like, well, not only are they more experienced, but they're also smart because they're in the world of teaching, that there's just an awkwardness around asking questions. So we have a series of different questions that probably a lot of listeners, if given the permission, would just say, hey, can I ask you this because I don't understand it?
Yeah.
So we each have a couple that we're going to ask you. So Carly, you want to lead us out of the gate with a no dumb question?
You started on an assumption that I'm very smart. I have many people who tell you not. That's not the case. So I love this section.
Parenthood life is very humbling for all of us.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I guess my question because we've had a few acronyms and we've talked about different types of degrees. Can you walk through, for the listeners, for me, when I was pushed to go to college, I was like, you are going to get your bachelor's degree, and then you should probably go get your master's degree because you're a woman that wants to work and have kids, and you should probably do that as fast as you can if you want any chance at anything. That was kind of the push I got, right? Okay. But now we're talking about technical degrees and associate's degrees and community college transferring to bachelor. Can you help us understand the whole framework a little bit of what are these different certifications? So there's a bachelor's, associate's, certification for plumbers, welders. What are the different levels of institution and types of certifications or degrees people can get?
And I could spend a long time talking about this, but I'll try to be as brief as possible. When I think about the community colleges and TCATs, I think of associate degrees and then certificates that are what we would say pre-bachelor's or anything that happens before you actually get a 4-year degree. Some of these are short-term certificates, so a year or less, which I've already talked about a little bit here. Others might be a long-term certificate, a 1 to 2 year program that requires more disciplinary focus as well. But typically they are targeted towards meeting an immediate workforce need. I get this short-term certificate. I am able to go out and apply that to
can you give me examples? Because I feel like you probably have 107 and I can think of maybe 2.
Yeah, and I will definitely correct myself after this as well. But phlebotomy, drawing blood. You mentioned plumbing, machinery, anything that happens again at our Technical College of Applied Technology. There are many different programs from childcare to cosmetology to the hands-on robotics machinery classes there. Again, they're specifically geared towards an acute workforce identification.
Okay.
With associate degrees, you've got applied associate degrees that are like what I just said for the certificates, but require more training. That could be in a nursing field, for instance, or healthcare field in general. And then you'll have associate degrees that are more general studies in nature that provide the first 60 credit hours for what you would need to transfer on to a university and to get a bachelor's degree. And then you go on to university, and we have 4-year degrees there, some post-bachelor certificates, which you can get in less than a year to help refine a need for a workforce, and then master's and doctorate. The trick is identifying for students the pathway to a successful career later on. And success could be defined by many ways, but essentially that what you're learning here is applicable to the real world. Philosophy major, oftentimes considered what is this major for? What do they do? Well, actually, in the workforce, it shows to have a very strong power to it. Oftentimes, that is partnered with a law degree or some other master's degree that can draw from that. Our desire, our strategy is to help identify for students, if you go this direction, you do need to go on to graduate school to get your master's degree. And in that sense, it will be worthwhile to go that path. By identifying that worthwhile path, whether it's a 6-month certificate or a long doctoral journey.
Okay, and then you had mentioned earlier that you're trying to meet these needs. So are doctors just saying, we need phlebotomists, please make more programs? Are they literally just calling your office? How do you know what programs you even need to plant?
We have a couple of ways of doing it. We have a structural process for it where we partner with the Department of Labor, Workforce and Development, ECD, the Economic and Community Development, and the Department of Education. We have a report that we put out together yearly. It's called the Supply and Demand Report. And there we're looking at a whole robust area of data that we have at the state that identifies job openings, identifies the critical needs across the state and all the workforce development areas. What are we seeing that are popping up as showing in the data that we have as supply needs? And of course, our technical colleges, they have local workforce boards as well, where they get more of a qualitative input. And they're required to have these workforce development boards that they consult with and that help guide the programs that they have with their TCATs to say, well, actually, we do need more phlebotomists. Or that area over here, you guys have a wait list because those students don't have as many job opportunities, and that helps inform what you provide going forward.
And it keeps in my head thinking about how I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. And so
Schoolhouse Rock is always a go-to.
Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah,
I want
absolutely.
like the Schoolhouse Rock rap. Please, you don't have to rap. I
I'm
promise
gonna do
you.
rap now.
Yeah,
Okay,
that
okay.
was actually why we brought you.
Okay, good.
Just so you know,
me so well.
Yes, clearly. But I kind of want the Schoolhouse Rock version of how do you get, okay, there's this new field. So we have AI happening.
Yeah.
There's new technology coming into play all the time. From start to finish, how long does it take to plant a new program? Do you have special relationships with different institutions from small to large that you try to incubate something so then you can serve another population?
Yeah.
How does that go from a paper
I'd say
to?
in our recent past, we have been more of a vetting of programs. An institution comes to us with a program, and we walk them through. First of all, we put that program out on a public display on our website and let all institutions know this institution is proposing this program. To what extent does this overlap with you? Not from necessarily a competitive standpoint, but more of, can you tell us from your perspective and what you're doing, and tell the institution what are the realities of putting this program up. So it goes through that process. We bring in outside experts outside of Tennessee and as well to kick the tires on it too. It goes in front of the institution's board and then ultimately in front of our commission for approval. We've actually gone through a rethinking of that whole process, in part pushed by the institutions. For the fields of AI, taking over a year to go through our process was way too long. And now we've developed a process to be able to vet those programs within 3 to 6 months. If the institutions are going through the process at deliberate speed on their part too. So try to be more responsive to the workforce needs. I spent the first 8 months of my executive director tenure working on that with our colleagues at the institutions and with my staff as well. But we also heard from institutions, hey, it'd be really helpful if you can help us project needs as well. And we do that through the supply and demand report that is looking more at what are the real world needs right now. But can we look around the corner 10 years down the road to say what would be good to start working on right now? And we're exploring opportunities to make that happen through outside services for that purpose.
Okay, last question. You were talking about you have these counselors in schools that are helping. Yeah. So is that similar to a guidance counselor role? And I guess my other question would be, there are so many students. That feels very high touch. How are you guys replicating that?
That's a great question. So we have what we call Advised TN. We have over 30 high school counselors across the state of Tennessee, college counselors. They're funded by the state, and they are at high schools that have lower college going rates. We place them there, and they are there to solely talk about not just college, but post-secondary. To that conversation we had earlier about post-secondary training, what are the options that are out there for you? And we're not the only ones who are doing something like this. We have the Nicewanger Foundation out east, the Ayers Foundation, which is primarily out west, where they have similar models too. And yet the need, to your point, is much larger than what we're all providing right now. And so we're trying to figure out ways to help capitalize and expand on our services in partnership and in working with each other to make that happen. But the purpose is like they go there and they are not traditional guidance counselors because a lot of guidance counselors are helping students get through high school, just make it through all the challenges that are there. These college advisors are there to help them think afterwards and what you need to do and what's out there post. I used to be an admission counselor for a college, my alma mater, Davidson College. And when I would travel to wealthier school districts, they had staff like that already. College counselors, public and private, college counselors who were there to just talk about college. That's not necessarily true at a lot of high schools that are under-resourced. So we help provide that.
That's great.
I'm learning about THEC for the first time today. And in the intro, hearing all of the different responsibilities that you outlined, and I'm convinced that was probably 5% of the full range of responsibility. My series of dumb questions, I think, starts there, that most people, when they hear of a governmental arm or organization with a lot of responsibility, it scares them immediately to just feel like, oh my gosh, this is going to be full of bureaucracy and red tape. So when you think about all of the different things that THEC does, if you had to identify 1 or 2 or 3 things that you do best, and then maybe 1 or 2 things to say, this is something we struggle with, but we're trying to do better at.
Yeah.
Could you give me a couple of those on either end of the bell curve?
Absolutely. I think what we do really well is we have robust financial aid in that we serve and connect with, say, financial aid counselors across the state. There's been a series of FAFSA issues this past 6 months.
FAFSA being?
The free application for federal student aid. Thank you. What the heck is FAFSA? Free application for federal student aid. The rollout of a new application has caused lots of issues across the country. So to be able to get through the noise and collectively with our institutions and with high school guidance counselors help students navigate, we have the arm for that and have done, I'd say, a really substantial, great job in doing so. Data. We collect lots of data. No institution in Tennessee has the data that we have. We're able to see high school seniors, where they go after they leave high school, and track them to the state of Washington through data capacity that we have. Track them from a TCAT onto a university here in Tennessee or elsewhere. So to be able to tell the story and identify those metrics is a strength of ours, and we're also trying to become even better at doing that. A big thing that I am putting a lot of my time and attention into is identifying the handful of items that we as higher education can speak into with one voice. That is traditionally the role of a coordinating body, as I said earlier, to speak to the state of the institutional needs. That's something that I am committed to even doing more so. So to your point of what can we be better at, that's it. We have 8 different governing boards in Tennessee of our public institutions. You have the University of Tennessee system. You have the Tennessee Board of Regents, which is over our community colleges and our technical colleges. And we have 6 universities that each have their own governing board. It's a lot of parties.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And collectively working with the administrations and the leadership on a handful of issues, perceptions of higher ed, on-time completion, the value of higher education. That's what I'm leaning into right now specifically, so that in upcoming General Assembly sessions and conversations with the governor and the administration, we can better explain, I can better explain and advocate for those needs.
One of the things that I picked out from the list of responsibilities that you indicated was the approval rights for new types of degrees and things that universities want to offer. And that's a huge amount of authority and responsibility.
Yeah.
So first, can you just help clarify what the intention of that is beyond just a public university, but at private universities and organizations? Like, what's the rationale for that level of authority? And maybe secondly, what's your enforcement mechanism if someone says, I ain't doing it, and we're teaching this regardless of whether you approve it or not?
Right.
I'm sure there's an enforcement mechanism, but just help me understand that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the latter part, and that is authorization of new programs and new institutions, a proprietary institution that comes to serve. Pretty much any business that offers a service in Tennessee or any state typically has a state agency that is making sure, okay, you guys are meeting certain conditions. And that's what we are for the state of Tennessee. No different from name a body that to look into whether different services are being provided as advertised. So consumer protection element of it.
Okay.
And if an institution goes crossways with that, then there's the equivalent of pulling your authority to be able to offer that here in the state of Tennessee. That's one aspect of it. But to like why we were created to begin with, back in the 1960s, 1967, it was when THEC was founded. And that's when a lot of states had started to create coordinating bodies as well, is recognizing it's not to police what institutions can do, but ensure, since we're putting state funding towards it, that certain programs that may serve fewer students don't become duplicative across the state. Healthy competition is wonderful, absolutely, and we always have an eye toward that. But to make sure that as a state is putting its resources towards entities that are not just ramping up their own resources in competition, that's not going anywhere with those students. So that's what we have an eye toward, which is why I went to earlier when a new public program comes to us, we put it out on our website for everyone to weigh in, to start poking holes in it, to identify how can this be sure that it's the strongest that's available for what this program puts forward. That's the intent of it. And what we need to do, and this is important as you recognized already, is making sure that we just don't create red tape for the sake of having red tape. There's a line that you can cross to be too intense about that. A good tire check to make sure that these programs are not just science experiments, and like maybe over a decade or two they'll get it right for the students. We want students who go into it to know that they're going to come out with a credential that's valuable. That's the service that we provide on the front end for them. But again, we need to make sure that it's not taking over a year for an academic program to get set up. That's a quick review, a quick shore this up, strengthen this program, get you on a road in 3 to 6 months with it too.
Thank you for answering a series of dumb questions and just things that we want to find out. I'd love to learn a little more about your personal story.
Yeah.
So in the same spirit of just how does this whole thing work, can you talk about how big THEC just structurally is? How did you get your role? Were you elected? Were you appointed?
Yeah.
How long do you hold the role? Just kind of walk us through the X's and O's of a little bit of your story.
Yeah. So the Higher Ed Commission has roughly 150 people who work for us.
Okay.
And so wonderful colleagues, some of the best in the state and best in the field on that. I started working there 2013. It was January 2013 as an intern. I was a graduate student at Vanderbilt. And before I became a graduate student, I worked in the admission field, enrollment management, at a small college. And I thought I'd be going back to that after I finished my graduate program in higher ed administration. But I discovered while at Vanderbilt that there's this whole world of state level policy where you can make decisions that affect 250,000 students on helping them get through and make college more affordable. And affordability was always my big interest. I had an economics background. I worked in financial aid. I wanted to make college more accessible and more successful for students. So I discovered of the great innovative practices of the Higher Ed Commission, got an internship there, was offered a full-time job the next semester as a fiscal policy analyst before I finished my degree. And then gradually over 12 years, I moved up into research roles, policy roles, general policy roles, and on to executive director. And I was appointed by the commission in a public review process that took place back in November for that. How long is the term? There is no term length, so we'll see how long that term lasts. There's been some who've served for 17 years, others for a few years. It just depends on the realities of the day.
Who was your predecessor and what was the transition like?
I've had my immediate predecessor was Dr. Emily House. She was my immediate full-time predecessor. Then we had an interim and Bob Smith. Emily House is a really good friend of mine. She's now on faculty at Vanderbilt. And she knew early on that she wanted to be an executive director of a place like THEC. And her passion for it was just really strong. And that was very much influential on me. My immediate predecessor is a former chancellor of UT Martin, and was also a mentor of mine in the leadership sphere too. And so to be able to learn from him over time has been really helpful too. And so, yeah, I've now been in this position full-time as non-interim for about 8 months.
Got it. So appointed by the governor?
Appointed by the commission.
By the commission.
Yes.
Okay.
And the commission is itself appointed by the governor and the General Assembly.
There's a little bit of a political element to your position as well, in that I imagine the types of things that you want to accomplish, you've got to work with the legislature and ensure that they're on board for the types of initiatives that you're kind of seeing and having a vision for. So maybe talk about the magic wand of if you could accomplish and do a couple things that maybe were independent of how it lands politically here or there, but if you really had free reign to accomplish a couple aspects in Tennessee, I'd love to know what those were.
Okay. Yeah, and you are correct about the politics, big P politics, small P politics, institutional politics that weigh into that as well, alma maters, etc. And while I see my role as serving as a voice for all of higher education, really what I spend a lot of my time in doing is speaking to our stakeholders as legislators, the administration, to identify what it is that they're seeing, what are they perceiving from higher ed
Yeah.
that they want to address and they need to address. And I've got a whole portfolio of options and policy ideas that we can work with to address it. Number one in my mind right now is addressing the perception of higher education, the value of higher education. And I think that goes beyond just talking about, is it worth it? Or will I get a good job? The data shows when you complete that degree, your life is probably going to be much better than if you did not do that.
Yeah.
But what is also driving the conversation about maybe not higher education? Something that I'm leaning more into right now is, and UT Knoxville has done a fantastic job in doing this. I have some of our other institutions, is going back into the civic learning aspect of higher education, the dialogue building of really tough issues on campuses. That's traditionally not a space that THEC has been involved in, and we don't need to be intensely involved in. But when I talk about with a legislator who says, my big frustration with higher ed, so if I go to that campus, I can't even have a conversation with a student on some dicey topics. And I don't think that's pervasive across higher education, but it's certainly a perception.
Are they worried that they're going to be shouted down?
Yes.
Or okay.
Yeah. They're not necessarily worried. They've seen that happen before. And higher education, I loved higher education because that's a place where you can be involved passionately in big ideas and learn and be pushed and pulled on your prior thoughts on any topic and learn and grow from it. And I know that's still happening in higher education, but it's not what makes the news. And those one-off engagements that a legislator might have will certainly paint that picture even darker for them. So I've been working with a multi-state collaborative made up of a number of individuals like myself and exploring this. And we're coming from red states, we're coming from blue states, which is how do we make sure that those dialogue that we think is very important in higher education continues. And like I said earlier, UT Knoxville's done a really good job at this with the Baker Center, which is now a college on the campus. And I have a favorite podcast of mine that you may have heard as well called You May Be Right.
I have heard that.
Yeah, with Governor Haslam and Governor Bredesen.
Yes.
Governors from different political parties coming together and having conversations like this with experts on those dicey topic areas. And that's what I love about higher education, is that that's the type of conversations that students should be involved in, and again are. But how do we make sure that we can better paint that picture and ensure that's happening across our campuses? So it's more starting that conversation and identifying the places in Tennessee where that's working very well, and to pull at it and see, okay, what is applicable across higher education in Tennessee to put a better spotlight and to strengthen that at our campuses. And then two, I've mentioned this already, but any initiatives that we can do to increase the graduation on-time completion of our students, to move away from a 6-year graduation rate talk and conversation to a 4-year, and identify the true challenges to making that happen. Because I think that would go a long way towards the perception of higher education. We can lower the cost burden of colleges and universities, and we in Tennessee have done a great job at doing that. But if you need to stay another year in college, that means you've got foregone income that you're not getting, and tuition as well that's building on top of that. So address the conversations about on-time completion to provide that support to our institutions, to have more flexible scheduling, to have more completion grant opportunities, to have even more effective financial aid. That's what my area of focus will continue to be on. So I am open to any policy ideas and options that will go towards that direction if we could all work together on it.
We talked some about the limiting factors that pushes someone from 4 to 6 years or beyond.
Yeah.
And just so I can help best understand the problem, the first one that I hear loud and clear is that there are financial limitations and barriers, that a student gets in and just can't go 4 years without income or the income that they're able to get while being a full-time student just does not cut it any longer, and they've got to make a change. So I think I clearly hear that first problem,
Right.
and maybe you would assign that to be the majority of the reason why people go from 4 to 6 years or longer. What are some other ones with specificity that you see as major disruptors that push someone from 4 to 6 years or beyond?
And the biggest area, and we've made some substantial changes already here, is on when students transfer from one institution to another, say going from a community college to a university. In Tennessee, we have the Tennessee transfer pathways. And there are over 70 Tennessee transfer pathways where institutions sign on to say if a student, and these are statutory bound, if a student graduates with this Tennessee transfer pathway, an associate degree from a community college, we will accept that into our institution as their general education.
I see.
So that should provide a streamlined, they're here for 2 years, they're there for 2 years, they're out. However, over the 15 years that we've had these, we have what we call the asterisks pop up, where we had upwards of 232 asterisks across the 70 programs that would say, well, actually at this university, you need to take this course up here and that course won't count. And so you've got to be mindful if you're going to come here. And the accumulation of those asterisks have really bogged down what could be and is a very successful opportunity for students. And so we are convening institutions now in an ongoing 5-year review to take that 232 asterisks down to 0. In the first few months, this takes working very intensively with faculty and department chairs to, these are programs that they have purview over in their role, and getting them to remove those asterisks. In the first 6 months, we're down now to about 200 asterisks, and we're churning through them. But that, to your question, those barriers that we put up, even when we have the Tennessee transfer pathway system, we still put up these barriers probably for what we think are good reasons at first, but in the grand scheme are not. How can we chip that away, that red tape away, to help them get through faster?
Back to stupid questions. How do people even learn about these transfer opportunities? I mean, is it published somewhere? I'm just thinking how hard it was to look through the course catalog when we were in college and try to pick what was going to work. And if it changed my major, this is going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
And then you're looking across the state at all these different institutions and trying to crisscross applesauce. How on earth does somebody even navigate?
Yeah. And again, in higher education, we make it difficult to navigate and to have, like we said earlier, like college advisors at the high school, a similar support system at the colleges, what we call the wraparound support. Completion coaches has been one that our community colleges have been leaning into, and our universities, or our one-stop shop at our universities, where you can go to one source on campus and have all your registrar, financial aid, academic advising, all that stuff happening in one spot. Because in the past, it would be like, you've got to go over here for this, over there for this, over there. We don't even know if they're in right now. It's never been great. And so bringing more transparency into those advising services is a big way of doing it. But the issue you run into, like I said earlier, with the Tennessee transfer pathways is you get those advisors to say, yeah, but look at how many asterisks are a part of this. This could be a little difficult. We recommend going a different direction. So the support systems are there, just making sure that what they can point to are effective and efficient. That's where a lot of our work has to go to. But again, to your point, that takes the student at an institution to be proactive and to seek out that help and support too. We're starting to put that on its head, whether it's through nonprofit organizations or institutions, to seek those students out specifically, and to not rely on email. Students aren't reading email, to really meet them where they are, whether it's in orientation or in the classroom. you name it, to get that information across to them.
I'd need you to like draw me a picture.
Yeah,
Here is your Candyland map.
that's
You
right.
can
Here's how you go.
This many spaces.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
a board game would be
A board
ideal.
game where the dice is like all the same number, so that they don't have to guess, like like hope and
Perfect.
pray. You know, like
Yes.
just move forward.
I love this idea.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. Like anything that's, anytime you start inserting choice that doesn't need to be there, like choose your major, choose what life you want to have. Don't have to choose about how to puzzle piece your credits together to get to 120 credit hours. Once you do that, you're going to start to see students drop out, and the choice paralysis that can start to creep in, where they're at a loss for what to do because there's so much choice that they have to make. Streamline those choices so that they're really making the choices about what's best for their life. What life do they want to have? And we'll make it work for you from that point forward.
Okay, I've had this question for a long time. When you're thinking
Yeah.
philosophically, you said philosophy is good, right? When you think philosophically about what I want my life to look like,
Yeah.
you know, and then you come from maybe a culture of people saying, you go to college, you go to school. Do you think the reason a lot of people aren't getting more technical degrees, even if it would take them to the lifestyle they want, is a perception problem, or that communities or families aren't encouraging it? Is that part of the issue here?
Yeah.
It needs to be like a heart change in what we think is successful for our kids.
I think there's a number of points to go down with that one, to explore. One is, what's around you. When I went to college, and I was not a first generation student. I had a mom and a dad and a stepdad, and all of them had college education of some sort. But yet what I saw were doctors and lawyers. I didn't really see engineers in my life that I knew of. I was from a rural town in Western North Carolina, and I wanted to be a band teacher for a long time because I was in band, and that was a profession I knew. And so part of it is not knowing what else is out there, and what it means to have a good technical job and what's the pathway to do so. Another issue is that oftentimes we do hear that college isn't for everybody, but a lot of times the people who are saying that are going to be darn sure their kid goes to a 4-year college, and do what they did when they were in university, because they know that's the surest bet. And major, you can figure that out later. I hope it just is worthwhile to you. I think it's changing the perception of those who do have a long lineage of going to college, going to university specifically, to also look out there and see what's available at a technical college and community college, because you might get into your 3rd year at a university doing what everyone around you is doing and realize that's not the pathway for you, but for lack of better options or guidance, that's where you are. And so that takes a lot of work in high school. I mentioned earlier dual enrollment, and I haven't really brought that out much already. The state of Tennessee has greatly intensified its focus on dual enrollment. We have dual enrollment grants that my agency gives out to high school students.
Can you define dual enrollment?
Dual enrollment is being dually enrolled in high school, both in high school and in a college of some sort. And so you're getting credit that's going towards your high school degree, and you're getting credit that goes towards a college certificate or a program. Typically, these are happening in one of two places. They're happening at a college or university, and there's just an arrangement with the high school that credit will transfer over. Or they're actually happening at a high school, and there is a properly trained teacher or professor who's coming to that high school to teach college-level curriculum. And the General Assembly and the administration have greatly increased the offerings of dual enrollment grant so that students can start off in 9th grade now going to a technical college, a TCAT, to work on a vocational certificate that can set them up well for immediately when they graduate from high school by the end of that time.
That's
I'm
really
super
smart.
interested in that. We have a daughter that has some different learning differences,
Yeah.
and so she works so hard and she does really well. But school is just always going to take longer for her. It's always going to be more challenging.
Yeah.
But she is actually a prolific baker. This kid's 11 and can bake bread, make fresh pasta, that she is truly gifted with her hands in the kitchen. And so we as parents have been raking our head of, we want to give her the best. But I love what you're saying about dual enrollment. Would that go towards something like culinary school, that she could dual enroll in high school and maybe do summer classes where she would get some credits and things
Absolutely.
like that.
And she can do them during the academic year too. I mean, these are taking the place of your high school classes as
Starting
well.
in ninth grade.
Starting in ninth grade, it depends on the school district whether they opt into that. But at the state, we've made it available to all Tennesseans if they're again, it becomes an arrangement between the high school district and the community college curriculum to make that happen. But yeah, and I'd say Tennessee Board of Regents have done a really good job of. There's actually, I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and a few years ago, TBR came out with a coloring book to put into daycares and preschools to show like what type of jobs you can get to by going to a TCAT and enrolling in culinary, enrolling in machinery, you name it. And I can see how that might come across as like, is that really helpful? And I'm seeing kids gather around this coloring book, their daycare, and learning about new professions
Oh, for
and
sure.
what you can do.
It's my
So it
kid's
starts
favorite
early.
topic.
Really?
What do I want to be when I grow
Oh,
up?
absolutely.
You
Yes.
know, and
Yeah.
I've got one that wants to be a vet, and I am not gifted in veterinary skills.
Yeah.
The sciences were not my gifting, and so I'm out there Googling what does it take to become a veterinarian? Like, how could she do summer work that could prepare her to know if she wants to do that? And so I love what you're saying because I have no idea.
Yeah, and she's so fortunate to have you to do that. And not everyone necessarily has a parent who's got the time or the resources to even start to even realizing early on, maybe I need to be thinking about something different here. And I had a financial aid director I used to work for, and he'd always get the question, how early should you start talking about financial aid to parents? And his response was Lamaze class, like as early as possible. But that's true about your career planning and your college planning. And when you've got a 6-year-old who might see the world a little bit differently, my 6-year-old likes to create things, whether it's a dish to eat or going to Lowe's and tinkering on with some tools there, or he wants to have a little craft area in the house too. Like he just likes creating things. How can we channel that into something that makes sense so that when they get to 9th grade or 12th grade, maybe it's not a 4-year experience that they need to have, but it's something else, and we can start that conversation now.
Last question I've got for you, and this may be picking a problem that you just don't have time to pick, but with that lead in, Carly and I hire a lot of people, and sometimes we see people come with degrees that just make us shake our head of saying that is seriously not a 4-year or 2-year degree. Like you can't be serious. What's the real degree? And that is the real degree. And I won't name it specifically, but we all know the types of degrees that we're talking about. So is that in your headspace part of your responsibility that as much as you approve different ones, at times you may remove them or have some type of guardianship to ensure that when they do graduate, they don't graduate with a degree that is so inapplicable to serving them in real life that, yes, perhaps they graduated, but gosh, it's as if they didn't.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. In our approval process, that is certainly a part of the equation. And we require our institutions to tell us and to tell our commission and the outside experts, how's that diploma, that degree, going to serve them afterwards? What's the workforce demand? And our commission is really eager. I mean, these are both lay members and constitutional officers for the state. They will drill into that question exactly. What's coming afterward for them? You asked us, do we as a board, as a commission, terminate programs? Essentially, that's the language we would use. We don't have terminating authority. And honestly, the governing boards that are in charge of the finances of institutions, they care a lot about that stuff. So what we do is we produce a low performing report, like how many graduates are being produced by programs, what are the low performing. We put that out there and we speak to it as well. And it's a resource for our governing boards and our presidents to use when they're making those decisions on what works, what doesn't work. But I also think, let's say for a program that we don't have control over, and it's a head scratcher, it's incumbent on the institution, if they offer those, to say, this degree as it stands alone is really best, as I mentioned earlier, to give you the critical thinking skills you need to go on to a graduate program that better refines towards, maybe it's a law degree, maybe it's something that does require extra graduate education, but alone in the vacuum, it might be difficult for you to explain what that value is. And it's incumbent on the institutions to help institutions equip them to make that as valuable as possible.
That's a great answer. And I also can understand the spirit of saying, you know what, Spencer, that's a great problem to have, but let's just first focus on getting them like through school to begin with. So I can appreciate both sides of that for sure.
Yeah.
And I think my main takeaway from today, as I just reflect on it, is the very word higher education is something that is so much broader than typical college.
Yeah.
And Carly talked about this a little bit earlier, is that there's a little bit of a stigma and a heart posture around higher education that historically has been somewhat to the exclusion of really important technical schools, community colleges, giving people the real skill sets that they can really succeed and have awesome, like 6-figure paying jobs
Right.
in demand. And I just really appreciate in how you've gone through this to address and spend so much time focusing on each of the different aspects, because they each are incredibly valuable. And I kind of feel that's where our society is calling out when they say not everybody should go to college. It's not people saying, hey, let's have kids graduate high school and have no skills and just hope they make it because college didn't work. And that's not the message. And I'm really glad to see the blending of that in kind of how intentional you are about working with schools of each caliber inside of the state and focusing on that on-time graduation.
Yeah.
That is a great missional mindset to say, let's get them in and get them through and out into the real world.
Yeah, it gets me up every day to start thinking through that. And I just want to thank you guys for having me here today to speak to it as well.
So fun, but we can't let you go yet because there is a Hulk hand.
Oh, the Hulk
over
hand.
my right shoulder that has been,
What is that?
like what is happening?
What's the deal
is
with the
there
Hulk?
power about to come out? Tell me what I need to know.
Yeah, so I brought that in today because I do think of it as quite whimsical, but the baseline of it, where it comes from, is fun too. I've been at THEC now for, like I said earlier, for about 12 years. It's been a long time, and I've developed a lot of great relationships there with my colleagues and staff and friends and mentors. But early on, when I was an analyst, like the way I was connecting with some other staff, there were some great personalities there. We just give each other like fist bumps all the time. And that gradually changed into like, let's do dog pounds, like pound, and then like go fetch, or like a snail, like a whole bunch of, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when one of my colleagues left, she gave two of us two Hulk hands, one for me and one for Herbert Brown to take as well. And it's just a reminder of, we're doing great things, having big conversations about higher education, but to develop those friendships with the people that you're working next to, bring the Hulk hand in and just have fun with each other.
I love that. I feel like your Halloween party would be a lot of fun.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. I expect pictures.
Yeah,
fall, please.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here.